This is a reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, 'Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back.' Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers?" He said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "You go and do likewise." We can imagine this man who was attacked along the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, robbed, beaten, and left half dead. Sadly, we can see the priest walking to the other side of the road, as the gospel says, so as to avoid having to deal with him. The same is true of the Levite who passes by. He too crosses to the other side, not wishing to get involved. And then a Samaritan, a foreigner, approaches, and we see an extraordinary act of love begin to unfold. An act of love that actually extends throughout the rest of that day and all through the night. For the gospel tells us that he cared for him, bandaged his wounds, lifted him up, placed him on his own animal, and took him to a nearby inn where he continues to care for him. And on the following day, the gospel tells us, this Samaritan man gives the innkeeper money and asks him to continue to care for him. And as if that wasn't enough, he promises to return on his way back from his journey to pay the innkeeper for any extra money he might spend in caring for this poor man's needs. What great love! But do we remember how the gospel actually begins? Why did Jesus tell this story? A scholar of the law wanted to test him. What must I do to gain eternal life? He asks. In other words, what does Moses tell us to do in the law? That was his question. And Jesus turns the question back to him and asks him, well, what is written in the law? And though the man answers correctly and apparently knows the law word for word, yet, in a very profound way, he does not understand any of it. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your strength, with all your mind. Love the Lord your God, and love your neighbor as yourself. We might read it this way. If we would love the Lord our God, and if the love of God dwelt deeply within us, we would become people of love. You and I would be a person of love. And filled with the love of God, we would not remain self-involved, concerned only about our own welfare and needs, closed off and isolated from the reality of the needs of others. Rather, we would become people who turn outward to the world around us and who sees in the person standing next to us another human person who is my neighbor. For when the love of God finally touches the depths of the mind and the heart and the spirit, we begin to see the truth that all of us, wounded as we are, all of us are children of the same loving God. The scholar of the law who approaches Jesus wants to debate with him. He wants to test Jesus, the gospel says. He wants to be justified. Jesus, however, simply wants him to learn how to love. The Good Samaritan shows extraordinary love to a stranger who he does not perceive as a stranger, but as a fellow human being, a fellow pilgrim on the journey of life. We live in a world today too often filled with suffering and division. As disciples of Christ, we cannot turn our backs on suffering or look the other way. We cannot cross to the other side of the street so as to avoid the issues. We may or may not ever personally encounter extreme situations of suffering, though we may. It's far more likely we will encounter simply the ordinary needs and difficulties that all human beings encounter along the way of life. But whatever circumstances we encounter in this life, one thing is certain: we can never remain indifferent to the suffering of others. For wherever or whenever we encounter suffering, or injustice against another, there Christ calls us in some form to bring his healing love. Jesus says to the scholar of the law, "Go and do likewise." These words remind me of the words spoken by Mary at the wedding feast of Cana when she says, "Do whatever he tells you." She tells us, "My Son has called each one of us to love God above all else and to love our neighbor as we love ourselves." Our mother reminds us this day that love is the very reason we exist. It is our highest and our most noble calling in this life. It is the most God-like thing we can do. For we are made in the image of God, who is love. Do whatever he tells you, our Mother Mary says to us. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind. And children, she says, love your neighbor, love your brothers and your sisters in this world as you love yourself. She will help us all to listen to her Son. She will help us all to be like unto him. She will help us, for she is our mother of perpetual